You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are... Oh, hey, class. What are you doing here in my nursery that I am building for my baby? Well, you're here because I'm recording a lecture in here, and I just felt this was appropriate because we are doing the female reproductive system today. So, the female reproductive system. Let's go. The female reproductive system has lots of functions to it. It's hormone production. It's, of course, creating a fetus, which is what we call an undelivered baby. It's sustaining the life of the fetus, both inside the body while it's growing for 40 weeks, and then outside the body through the use of lactation through breast milk. So female reproductive system's got a lot going on. We're going to talk about, once again, the anatomy and physiology, pathology, and diagnosis and treatment. Not even once again, for the final time. Y'all have made it to the last chapter of the book. Fantastic. We can see here in an unpregnant female, the female reproductive system is actually quite small. And in fact, most of it fits down into your pelvic region. So below your abdomen, way below your belly button, down where the pubic bones are and the pelvis is, the hips and everything, it's all tucked in down there when you are not pregnant. And it consists of the vagina, where's my mouse? The cervix, which is an opening between the vagina and the uterus itself, fallopian tubes, and ovaries. Combining forms for the female reproductive system are the amni or the amnion. This is fluid that surrounds the fetus as it is growing inside the uterus. It is first made of mostly mom's water intake. I have my water bottle over there, that's why I look that way. And then in the late stages, it's made by babies, mostly by baby's urine, because he is or she is learning how to use his body systems or her body systems. And so they swallow the amniotic fluid and then produce urine. The urine is sterile. There's nothing in it that can make the baby sick or make the mom sick. But yes, and if you recall, the reason that I was placed on maternity leave was because I had too little amniotic fluid. I had oligo, scanty, hydro, water, amnios actually. So hydramnios, yes. And too little amniotic fluid. Cervix is cervical for neck, or cervix, which is down in the female reproductive system. Colpal is vagina. I don't have a way for you to remember that. Just colpal is vagina. Epizio or epizi is the vulva. The vulva is all the external anatomy of a female. It contains labia majora and labia minora, and it's the opening to the urethra and the vagina, and it houses the clitoris as well. So it is the area where hair grows on the female, down there in the pelvic region. That whole area is known as the vulva, okay? Or the mons pubis, but the vulva. Gynec is female or woman. Gynecology is the study of female anatomy. A gynecologist studies female anatomy and diseases. Hystero is uterus. Hystero has the Latin phrase hysterical in it, as in somebody who cannot control themselves. So this is one of those signs that men name everything. And so they found women to be hysterical. And since they knew that women only had uteruses, that is how that came to be. Labia, I told you that the vulva, the epizio vulva, includes the labia, the lips. Remember we talked about labia in the digestive system because these are labia as well. But in the female reproductive system, we have labias down in our genital area. We have a labia majora, which covers everything and protects it. And then a labia minora, which is a very thin, sensitive piece of tissue on either side of the vagina. Mammo is breast. So is masto, mammo and masto. Oophoro is ovary. You have 2 ovaries, just like men have 2 testicles. Our ovaries are the equivalent of men's testicles. And then utero is uterus as well. So hystereo and utero are both uterus. These are some prefixes we have not seen before. I mean, we've seen dis and endo, yes, difficult and painful and in and within. But multi means many. That one makes sense. Noli means none or no. So you can have, you all are people who have not had pregnancies. So you're noli pregnancy. You've never had one. And primi means first. So you will have a firstborn, maybe if you want one at some point in time. It might be your only child, but they'll still be the first. There is no rule on this planet, ladies, that says you have to have babies. And I think I was clear with you guys that this was not planned. So there's no rule that says females have to have children. You are welcome to live your life without children, and you will still be as happy and fulfilled as anybody who does have children. Suffixes, also, these are new and pretty, well, some of them, pretty specific to the female. I don't have you doing prefixes and suffixes for your work this week because you had too much to do in this amount of time. I couldn't make it 3 weeks and fit everything else in. So I took those out. So just pay attention here. Arc is beginning. Menarche is when you begin your period. So whenever your very first period was ever, ladies, that was your menarche period. And then you have menopause at some point, which is going to be your very last period ever. Synthesis, surgical puncture to remove fluid. We know that one. Gravida is to be pregnant. Para is to bear offspring, so to push the baby out. Raphe is suture, and salpinx is fallopian tube. Oh, well, there we go. I just clicked that. What are the meanings of the following word parts? So this first one is really kind of interesting. And also, if you don't know this, then that's going to be difficult to explain. But culdo means cul-de-sac. Now, some of you may live in cul-de-sacs and some of you may not. But a cul-de-sac is a street that has no exit and it just circles back to the entrance. Okay, that wasn't so hard to explain at all. So there are some procedures that have the word coldal in it about the female anatomy, because really you can go up into the uterus, circle around, and come back out the same opening. So that's where that comes from. Lacto means milk. You would know if you're lactose intolerant, which typically happens in your adult stages because adult animals don't need milk, if you did not know that. So our bodies decide we don't need the enzyme lactase anymore to break down the milk. And so when we drink milk, the body's like, I don't need this. What are you doing? And then it gives you diarrhea and makes you feel really bad. Minnow is menstruation. So menses. So it's your monthly period. Or if you don't have a period monthly, that's okay. That's a hormone imbalance. But you could have a period irregularly, or on the opposite end of that, you could have multiple periods a month, also due to hormone imbalances. Ek is outside, outside. Neo is new. Saesis is a state of pregnancy. That one's actually brand new to me. I don't even know this term, but there we are, saesis. Partum is childbirth. So you can have prepartum, peripartum, and postpartum. So prepartum is before birth. Peri is around the time of birth and the act of birthing. And then postpartum is after giving birth. And then ragia is bursting forth. Functions of the female reproductive system are to produce new life. Okay. Manufacture our sex cells and our sex hormones. Our sex cells are ovums. We create ova. So females create eggs. We do not lay eggs. We're not chickens or reptiles. Or avians, sorry, we're not avians, which are birds or reptiles, but we do create an egg and then it has to be fertilized and then we grow the baby inside us. We are placental animals. So all mammals on the planet, anything that has hair produces milk and gives live birth and is endothermic. Those are the 4 things that make you a mammal. Endothermic means you create your own heat on the inside. Those all create an egg, but then form the baby inside. All the other types of animals that came before mammals, so birds, avians, reptiles, amphibians, etc., down the evolutionary tree, they lay eggs and the babies develop outside their bodies. Our sex hormones for females are progesterone and estrogen. And then men have these other ones, well, maybe not. Prolactin, I don't know that men have, but then luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and I am missing one. Did I say estrogen? Oxytocin, but both males and females have oxytocin. Prolactin, did I say prolactin? Oh God, who knows? Okay, support the growth and development of embryo and fetus. You do that for 40 weeks in utero or inside the uterus. And then you maintain life of the newborn. So once it's newborn, once it's been born, your body is supposed to continue giving it life through breastfeeding. Once again, no rule on this planet, ladies, that you have to breastfeed. That is a personal choice as well, if you were to have a baby. So here is the female reproductive system. We're going to go outside in, okay? So vagina, it's the opening to the outside. The vagina is both sexual, well, it is just a sexual organ. The penis enters the vagina during sexual intercourse and releases sperm. And then on the opposite end, 40 weeks later, if an egg is fertilized, the child, the baby, is born through the vagina into the outside world. The vagina is literally just a muscular tube, nothing else to it. The vagina is made of the same tissue as a male penis. So it can also engorge, which means it can lengthen and become filled with blood. And then it goes back to its normal shape afterwards. And this happens both during sexual intercourse and during childbirth. The cervix here is a piece of tissue with a very narrow opening. Before you ever have a baby, your cervical opening is about I want to say centimeter, but maybe that's too much. It's very tiny, which goes to say that nothing that you happen to have up your vagina, let's say a tampon, if you get to using tampons, or birth control, there's some birth controls that are inserted in the vagina. They don't get lost in your body. They're stuck in the vagina and you can get them out because the cervix stops anything from going further. The cervix, when pregnant, will be completely closed off with what we call a mucus plug, so nothing can enter the uterus and harm the baby. So bacteria can't get in there, and other things can't get in there to harm the baby. Here is the uterus. The uterus does an amazing thing where inside your body, I mean, it's smaller than your fist right now, inside your body. Like it's a tiny, tiny organ. Then it can expand to the size of a watermelon, like a large watermelon, like a big, heavy watermelon, and then go back to its original state. It has 3 tissues to it. The perimetrium is on the outside around the uterus. Peri is around, metro is uterus. The myometrium, which is the muscle of the uterus, and the endometrium, which is the interior lining of the uterus. The top of the uterus is called the fundus. It should be rounded. Sometimes it has a different shape, which can make birthing a bit difficult, but not impossible. Then on either side of the uterus, leading away or towards, depending on how you look at it, is something we call the fallopian tube. Now, fallopian was a person's name, so it's named after him because he's the one who discovered them, right? Because they existed the whole time. The fallopian tube job is to facilitate meeting of sperm and egg. So fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube. It does not occur in the uterus, but it occurs in the fallopian tube. And it also is where the egg is brought into the body. So here at the end of the fallopian tube, I want you to really notice that the ovary is not attached to the fallopian tube. There's actually some space there, but these fimbriae are much like cilia and they're constantly waving like this in the female body, constantly. And whenever an egg is released, it just sweeps the egg into the fallopian tube through the current it is creating in your body. And the egg comes from your ovaries. Your ovaries release one egg a month. Usually they alternate. The left one releases an egg or the right one releases the egg. Sometimes, genetically speaking, some women release multiple eggs at a time. Or you can be taking infertility, or not, you can be taking fertility drugs and your body is being made to release multiple eggs at a time. So ovary, egg is released, swept in by the fimbriae into the fallopian tube. If that egg is going to be fertilized, sperm meets it in the fallopian tube. It floats down to the uterus and plants in the wall. And then at the time of birth, the cervix expands to 10 centimeters or 2.5 inches or more, really, because there's a lot of stretching that happens. And the vagina expands as well. The baby is expelled and you have given birth. The ovaries are filled with ova. A single ova is called an ovum, O-V-U-M. They release ova into the fallopian tubes. The ovary's job is to create the ova, yes, but also to create all of these hormones, specifically the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone, which regulate menstruation. So when you ovulate, if the egg is not fertilized, the egg does not implant. And so your uterus is like, I don't need this lining I've been building. We're going to shed it. And shedding of that lining is what a menstruation is. The fallopian tubes drop the ova in using those fimbriae. Fimbriae pretty much just means fingers, by the way. And then peristalsis helps move the ovum towards the uterus. And the fallopian tube is where fertilization takes place. And I'm beating that with a dead horse because for some reason, people never seem to understand that. The uterus has the top, the fundus, the rounded part, the body, and the cervix at the bottom. And we talked about the layers of the uterus already. The vagina is a birth canal. Now, way back in the day, it used to be a thing that women's vaginas were always covered by a hymen if they had never had sex. And a hymen is a partial piece of tissue that is covering the opening of the vagina. And back in the day, let's say Renaissance area, when women were only allowed to sit and sew, like that was all they were allowed to do, they had their hymen intact. And when they had sex on their wedding night, there would be a little bit of bleeding and that would prove that they were a virgin, and it was a whole big thing. Nowadays, women are much more active. We do gymnastics and ride bikes and ride horses and fall down and climb trees and fall out of trees and do all when we're kids. And so it's very common that our hymens are already ruptured before we ever get to the point of our lives where sexual intercourse occurs. There are some cultures who still highly prize the whole being a virgin wife thing, which is like, great. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying the idea that you are going to have your hymen intact if you have been very active as a child, probably not a thing. So just know that. And we talked about the vulva. It has the mons pubis, which is the upper region where most of the hair growth is, the two lips, the vestibule, which is the opening to the vagina, and the clitoris. The breasts of the female are not only there for sexual pleasure for the whole porn industry that we have in this world. The breasts are there to feed babies. That is the evolutionary development of breasts. And so as you go through a pregnancy, your breast actually creates more and more and more. Actually, not even that. Every time you have a period, your breast is creating mammary glands. And then if you were to get pregnant, those mammary glands, like, quadruple in the amount of them. And the whole point of the mammary glands is to produce milk. And so they produce milk and they go down these lactiferous ducts to the nipple. Around the nipple is a darkened area called the areola. And the nipple itself is where either colostrum at the very first 2 or 3 days that your baby is feeding off the breast, you are producing something called colostrum, which is not true milk, but it's very beneficial to the baby. And then your milk comes in and you start producing actual breast milk. And that's all through the nipple. And you can pump that instead of breastfeeding, but still feed breast milk to the baby, or you can do a formula only baby. The uterus is made up of 3 layers. What are they? The parametrium, the endometrium, and the myometrium. And what is colostrum? It is a thin yellow fluid secreted from the female breast for the first few days of nursing. It provides nutrition and fortifies the newborn's immune system. And what it also really does is prepare the baby's gut by lining it with bacteria that will then be able to digest all the nutrients properly from breast milk. Okay, so I actually have a video for this slide. So let's go and just have the video play for us. If I can find it. There we go.
A pregnancy results from the completion of ovulation, fertilization, and implantation. The process begins when an oocyte is released from the ovary and travels into the uterine tube. If intercourse is performed, sperm travel from the vagina into the uterus, and through the uterus into the uterine tube. One sperm fertilizes the oocyte. The newly formed zygote divides by mitosis. When this zygote reaches the stage where it is made up of 4 cells, it is called an embryo. The embryo is called a morula when it develops into a solid ball of 16 cells. The cells keep dividing, and a fluid-filled cavity develops in the embryo. It is now called a blastocyst. The blastocyst implants in the lining of the uterus, called the endometrium. Attachment of the blastocyst causes nearby endometrial cells to grow quickly. In 5 days, the blastocyst is fully embedded and implantation is complete.
So that whole process of the ovary releasing an egg, the sperm meeting the egg, and the egg being implanted, that takes anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks from ovulation. And so that implantation, when the blastula is surrounded by the tissue of the uterine lining, that actually can cause some bleeding, and people will think, oh, this is just my normal 4-week period, and do not know that they're pregnant. So it's one of those little tricksy things of the world where most people don't realize they're pregnant until they're 6 to 8 weeks along, because that's when the hormones kick in and you start feeling really gross. It didn't happen to me. It totally happened to me. It was awful. Okay, so that is what this slide is showing. It's that video showing ovulation. And then the ovum is in the fallopian tube, and the sperm travel from the vagina up the cervix, through the uterus, through the fallopian tube, and meet the egg. And the video makes very clear that only one sperm fertilized the egg. Males, in every single ejaculate, we talked about this in the last PowerPoint, you have millions of sperm. You're just beating, you're hedging your bets. You're going against the odds. So one of them should make it. The reason for that is that your eggs, ladies, that we produce are 23 chromosomes. Males, your sperm, are 23 chromosomes. That makes a 46 chromosome human being. If more than one sperm were to enter the ovum, you'd have too many chromosomes, and it would not make a functional anything. The body would just terminate that pregnancy. It would never happen. It's not viable as a human being. So only one sperm. How do we get twins? You get it 2 ways. Identical twins are when one fertilized egg very, very early, like between the 2 and the 3 days, splits into 2. And you get 2 identical human beings because it's the same ovum and the same sperm making 2. The second one is, I've already mentioned, females, you can actually ovulate more than 1 egg at a time. And if that happens, then multiple sperm fertilize each egg, and you have fraternal twins, where it's different sperm and different eggs, and so they're siblings, they're not identical. This is what happens during the 9 months, which is actually 10 months of pregnancy, in terms of the baby's growth and development. I don't really have a whole lot to say about this. At 14 weeks, I can tell you that, of your 40-week pregnancy, every organ of the human baby is complete, and most of it just needs to mature. The last set of organs that mature are the lungs, because ideally that's the last set of organs that the baby is going to need before life occurs outside the human body. This causes complications when you have premature babies whose lungs aren't developed yet. And that's why they have to be in the neonatal intensive care unit and being taken care of. Your baby should be between, at full term, somewhere between 6-ish pounds to 11-ish pounds, which is a very big wide range for a baby, I understand. If you have gestational diabetes, you expect bigger babies. But the size that you are at birth, if you're full term, doesn't really determine anything about you and your health. It's just you can be born at, there's a range of normal sizes. But there is a limit to the upper part of that range because females, our pelvises are only so wide. So there's a certain size of baby that just literally cannot fit through the pelvis anymore when being born, and you'll have to have a C-section. The stages of labor, for 40 weeks, your cervix is closed up super tight to prevent anything from entering the uterus so that nothing harms the baby. Then, over a couple of weeks at the very end, your cervix starts to relax and open. And this is called dilation. And as it opens, it thins out almost completely. And that is called effacement. So here we see the cervix opening, and here we see it as thin as the rest of the uterus. That's stage 1 of labor, and it takes the longest amount of time. The average labor is 12 to 16 hours, and most of that time is dilation and effacement. The second stage is relatively quick. It can take anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours of the 16 hours. And this is the expulsion stage where we actually deliver the baby. But there is a third stage to pregnancy and delivery that no one really ever talks about, and that is delivering the placenta. Now, we haven't talked about the placenta yet, but every time you are pregnant, if you want to be pregnant, if you become pregnant, your body creates an entirely new organ called the placenta. The placenta is how the baby gets its oxygen and nutrients the entire time it's in utero through the umbilical cord. When the baby is born, your body does not need the placenta anymore. And it's actually very important that that placenta comes out, because if it doesn't, then it's actually going to start dying inside the body and can kill the mother. And so the uterus, right after that baby is born, the uterus starts contracting down, right? It gets smaller and smaller. The uterus doesn't need to be watermelon size anymore. The baby's gone. So it's going to start going back to its original size. Now, this takes a couple of weeks to happen, but very quickly, it gets much too small for the placenta. And I mean like within 20 minutes after birth. And so the placenta starts to shear away or pull away from the uterus. And somewhere in the first hour after delivering the baby, the placenta also needs to be delivered, which means you also push the placenta out as well. It's not difficult versus pushing the baby out. It just kind of falls out, but you got to have to help it a little bit. And that's the stages of labor. So now we're going to identify the structures that protect and nourish the developing fetus. You have the placenta that we just talked about. You create this entire new organ from scratch for every pregnancy that you have. Identical twins share one placenta. Fraternal twins, each baby has its own placenta. The umbilical cord is how blood with oxygen and nutrients get to your baby, and how wastes go back away from the baby, and they just go to the mom's bloodstream. And so mom breathes out the waste or pees out the kidneys, the waste products of the baby. Amniotic fluid is the cushion fluid around the baby. The amnion is the actual water sac. It's called a water sac. When you hear of water breaking, the amnion is what broke. And so the water comes out, the amniotic fluid comes out. The uterus itself, big muscular, it's actually one of the biggest muscles in the female body when it's, watermelon size and ready to push the baby out. And what happens during delivery is the uterus starts contracting. It actually goes from the top. It contracts from the top and pushes down, top and pushes down, and top and pushes down. And what it's pushing down is the baby. And so I told you 12 to 16 hours is a regular time frame for a delivery, labor and delivery. And so at first it's pushing the baby's head against the cervix to get it to dilate and thin out. And then once the cervix has done its job, then the uterus is pushing the baby out. So that's what contractions are, is the top of the uterus pushing down on the baby to get it out. This is the cavity of the uterus. So the space of the uterus. Very good, very good. The cervix we've talked about in depth. The chorion. Why don't I have a description for the chorion? It's part of the placenta. That's all I got, sorry. Oh, and that's it, that's the diseases. I mean, then we're gonna get into the diseases. So I'll stop this part here and then we'll talk about, diseases and disorders and signs and symptoms and treatments and all the things that we do for every other PowerPoint that we have done.